Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this episode of Let's Talk, a live stream where I interview professionals for their takes on mental health, addiction, and current events. My name is Dr. Weiner. I'm a psychologist and an addiction specialist, and we've got a great show for today, some fantastic guests. Before we dive into it, however, I feel like we have to take just a second to talk about the elephant in the room, which is what happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday. With the storming of the Capitol. And there's so many different ways we could talk about what happened from a mental health perspective in terms of why did it happen? How did it happen? What are we doing about it now? And this is obviously an ongoing situation. But I think if I was going to say just one thing about this, and it was shocking on so many levels, I hear a lot of people say things about how they feel like this isn't what America is. And for me, I feel like this actually is part of us. This is America, and we can very easily sometimes other people away and say like, well, that isn't us, or we would never do something like that. But here we are, and it did happen. And we saw Confederate flags in the Capitol building and all sorts of, we have 4 people dead because of what happened yesterday. And I think there's a lot of teachable moments here, but when I think about, again, from a mental health perspective, what's useful to reflect on is how do we go from wherever we are as individuals right now to giving ourselves permission to do something like that in a society that's supposed to be democratic, that's supposed to be free, and really checking our own assumptions and our own processes and how we're engaging with our fellow Americans politically. Are we vilifying people? Are we treating people as caricatures? Where are we getting our news? Are we looking at diverse sources, or are we staying in our own algorithmically derived echo chambers and so forth? I think that there's a lot of introspection we need to do as a country, but then also a lot of introspection that we really could use to do just as ourselves. So that being said, we do have a great show today to talk about addiction in the age of COVID. And so I'd like to pivot right now to start introducing my fantastic guests. So the first 2 folks we're going to bring in here are Tim Ryan and Jennifer Gimenez-Ryan. They are fantastic people. I've known them both for years. They're tremendous advocates for recovery, professional speakers. They both have amazing TED Talks, both of which I have watched. For both of them, they're powerful voices for hope and change. Tim and Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so happy to be here.
Of course. Would you mind taking just a second and telling us a little bit about what you're up to right now?
Jennifer.
Oh, thanks for throwing me under the bus. Right now we have Tim's daughter, his 5-year-old, my stepdaughter, here in California, and hence the Christmas tree is still up. It will be going down. I looked at him before we started and I said, it's September and the Christmas tree is still here. Just joking. But we have a lot of things going on. We are speaking all over, interventions. We're doing a podcast. I'm
guiding, directing people into treatment.
Getting, right now is a really tough time, as we're about to talk. And I just feel like there's a pandemic within a pandemic happening. And we've just been, being voices as much as we can to break this, fear of not being able to talk about something that's so apparent and happening.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your efforts, and really glad to have you on the show today. My second guest is a New York-based neurologist, board-certified addiction medicine specialist, expert in medication-assisted therapy. Thank you so much, Dr. Russell Surasky. Tripped on your name there. Welcome to the show.
It was close enough. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, what you're working on these days?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a neurologist, but I specify completely in addiction medicine. So I'm in the trenches day in and day out, helping people that are struggling with addiction. I am a director of an outpatient treatment program. I'm in private practice, and I also help train other physicians on how to use newer forms of medication-assisted treatment to help people in recovery, because the evolution in our understanding of what addiction is has come so far in just the last couple of years alone.
Yeah, no, there's been tremendous change. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I know I'm excited because addiction is what I live and breathe professionally, and to be able to have all different viewpoints for Tim and Jen, what you've gone through in your life, and seeing so many, doing so much speaking, seeing so many people around this. And Dr. Surasky, your view from the medical perspective, I think it's going to be special. So that being said, what I want to start us off with is a foundational question right now, which is how has COVID impacted the process of addiction and recovery? What have you seen harder? Have anything actually gotten easier? So Tim and Jenn, would you be willing to start us off?
Go ahead.
With COVID and what's happening, we basically have a pandemic within a pandemic right now. And we actually came down with COVID. We had it for 6 weeks, and actually Dr. Russell was one of our lifesavers.
He was our lifesaver.
We got connected with him, and he helped us out with some medication. But everything has changed. From people in addiction need purpose and connection. People are fearful of going to treatment. The AMAT clinics, a lot of them are shut down and they're running differently. People can't attend 12-step based or Christian based or smart recovery based or refuge recovery meetings in person. So everything's through technology now.
And you're also having, what recovery, being in recovery is about is having a communicative relationship with yourself, with a higher power, with your mentor, sponsor, with another human being. And a lot of people aren't being able to do that right now because of being lockdown. You can't be around anyone. And this spike that's happening all over the country and people are getting sick, there's a lot of fear. And then I'm getting, and Tim is getting, a lot of calls from friends that are normies. And when we call them normies, who don't have some disease of addiction or alcoholism or mental health, and they're calling me and they're like, and I'm talking about like high-end executives, from networks and stuff, going, hey, I have a question. Like, I've been on lockdown for a while. I'm starting to drink now at 3 o'clock my glass of wine or 12 o'clock. Am I becoming an alcoholic, or I'm really having a lot of anxiety? What does that mean? And I'm saying, well, you're suffering from mental health, and so it's really important that people understand what they're going through. And we have had a lot of friends with 40 years of recovery blow their brains out because they can't do their normal day-to-day structure thing and they have no purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're very much creatures of habit, and right now all of that has been thrown out the window. Well, Russ, how about you? Have you seen anything different? Things get harder, things get easier.
Well, I think Jenn and Tim, they actually hit it right on the head. I mean, essentially, I think a pandemic within a pandemic, yes, I would go further and say it's even more of a pandemic than the actual virus itself. There's a lot of fear mongering, especially in the media. And that fear itself is a trigger for people who are dealing with mental health and drug addiction. Also, as Tim and Jenn mentioned, getting access to care. People are scared, either scared to go in to get care because of COVID, or they're using it as a means to get around getting treatment because they're pretending that that's the reason why they don't want to get better yet. And meanwhile, people are overdosing at a rate of double or triple across the country right now. Out of fear because of all the healthy coping mechanisms that people have that help keep them sober, like gyms closing, as Tim mentioned, churches and temples closed. So with that goes to 12-step meetings. There's just financial difficulties, business issues. I mean, everything. You've taken away all the positive, healthy coping behaviors for people who are in recovery. And of course, I think I'd be interested to hear everyone's opinion on this, but interestingly enough, liquor stores were deemed essential during this pandemic, and I think that
dispensaries too.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. And I think that speaks to, look, I'm sure there's multiple motivations at play there, but I think it mainly speaks to the fact that the recognition by the politicians that, hey, there's a lot of people out there who really suffer with an addiction to alcohol. And if we're going to shut down all these things, then we're going to have another serious problem on our hands, which could be deadly withdrawal and so forth. And I think that's really what was behind that.
Yeah, I know I was really surprised. Well, surprised might be the wrong word, but concerned when I saw the increase in liquor sales, particularly online liquor sales and boxed wine, large quantities. It seems like people are really buying up. And there was an article in the Chicago Tribune, I'm Chicago based, where they were showing actually how the pot quantities that were being bought from dispensaries have actually, we here in Illinois were 25% over the national average. So people are really stocking up.
Well, what's happening is people are, you have the alcoholics that if the alcohol was taken away, they can go into seizures and die. But what I think also happened was the at-home mothers, the at-home fathers that are now working from home that were a social drinker that might have had 2 or 3 drinks at night. Now they're drinking at 3 in the afternoon. They're drinking at noon. They're drinking at 8, 9 in the morning. And they're crossing over that line from social drinker to dependent drinker to alcoholic. And we're seeing a plethora of people. We just guided a lady into treatment the other day that was in that exact situation, working from home and drinking and doing a lot of cocaine to keep her awake so she could keep working.
You also have people getting prescribed a lot of medication via telehealth, and then having their CVS, local pharmacy delivered to them, like having anxiety and scared. Like, of course you're gonna want Xanax, who doesn't want that, quick fix pill to make you feel okay. And then there's some people who really need it, and what you're talking about, Dr. Surasky, is when you're like saying about being there's no gym. Like I have to, because I didn't for a while. I don't have to do my little walks, and it's an hour. It's my me time. But I'm walking in the bedroom, we'll binge watch something, and I'm lifting weights, doing squats, like doing push-ups. Like I have to release those endorphins. If not, I'm not going to stay sane.
Sure, and if I could just add something to that, one of the other very serious consequences I'm seeing is that a lot of medicines that we use to help people with mental health and addiction, with things like bipolar, schizophrenia, and different drug addictions, whether it's opiates or alcohol, we are using some newer, very effective medicines that are delivered by injection. That's person-to-person contact. So when you have rehabs and outpatients and hospitals not accepting people in and closing their doors, it really does impact people's ability to get treatment. We have a lot of people that get treated with Vivitrol for opiate addiction, for example, at my rehab, and that saves their life, or at least for a large percentage of them, they are very heavily reliant on that to help protect them and help them with cravings and blocking opiates. And if you all of a sudden say, oh, sorry, we're going to send in a pill that you have to remember to take every day now, well, let's just say compliance, especially with everything going on right now, isn't so high. And we've seen overdoses just from that fact alone. So it really has tentacles that have spread across and hurt people from all facets.
Well, I'm going to go a little deeper with that. On the MAT side, you take me, and I tried the methadone route, and I tried the Suboxone route, but you take me as an addict. I'm at home now, and you're giving me a 30-day prescription of either methadone or Suboxone or Subutex. I don't have any online therapy, or I'm not doing it. I'm not doing any recovery. I'm going to misuse or abuse what I have because I have no foundation. And I see a lot of that happening. And then people are keeping it around just to keep their sick off, and they're going back to opiates or fentanyl or pills or whatever the dragon might be.
I mean, I also believe too is that when Tim and I were talking about this on our podcast the other day. Like next week, I turn 15 years sober, and I've come. Thank you. I've come a long way from a girl who tried to hang herself, 15 years ago. But I was thinking about the days or weeks before, and I couldn't imagine me right now trying to get sober. And the people that have tried to get sober in the last year, right? Like their sobriety, newcomers in the first 5 years. Like it is tough. It's tough for me, and I'm almost 15 years sober, like to do this thing called life. But I do it, and I'm very open, and I have tools and all this stuff. But it's really hard to give tools to someone when you're sitting in front of a screen. It's not the same as it was for people like us when we first got sober.
Or even working with either of you two as my doctor.
And when I was on medication, right, and I suffer from mental health issues, depression, and if I in the beginning didn't like taking pills, or I like taking them and then stopped taking them because I like the effects, right, and like of what that made me go up and down. And then they told me I needed to be adamant, but I had people watching me. We don't get to do that right now. We're not in this day and age. You can't really do that. I had a crew of people around me all the time. Different now.
Let me ask you guys a question. Something that really stuck out to me, Tim, when you were speaking, was this idea of fear, and how that's keeping people out of healthcare environments because people are afraid to go. And knowing a lot of people who run outpatient and then residential treatment centers, and I know every possible precaution is being taken right now, including things like quarantines when someone first comes in. People are really trying to be safe. And by and large, they are. I haven't actually heard, at least locally here in Chicago, of any outbreaks in treatment centers that I've been aware of. So my question for you guys is, have you found any tactics or ways of talking to people that get them more likely to take the steps that they really need to take to care for themselves and for their addiction at this time? Because like you were saying, when you're at home, you don't have that support around you.
Well, it's basically explaining to the person, you got three choices. You're going to get sober, you're going to die, or you're going to get caught up in the system, going to buy drugs or drinking and driving. And 90% of the people don't want to go to treatment because of fear. But once you explain that there's options available and you can explain what the journey is going to look like, once they go, 90% of the people don't want to leave because they finally have clarity. They're on Vivitrol, they're working a program, whatever the variable might be, but it's setting people up to succeed. And unfortunately, there's not enough people out there that take the time to educate the general public on what's available, because you have three types of families. You have the family that has no resources, you have the family that has state insurance, or they have an HMO or PPO insurance policy, or they're in the position of cash pay. So you have four variables, and it's having to guide and direct each of those variables. The ones that are struggling the most are the ones that don't have insurance or on state insurance, because it is limited to get them into treatment. There are waiting lists, and more families are losing their health insurance now due to COVID, losing their jobs, and they have that good insurance and they can't pay $1,500 or $2,000 a month for their COVID insurance policy.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. You guys hit it right on the head. I would say that addiction at this point, the epidemic is tremendous. Everyone's just 1 degree of separation from it. If you're not affected yourself, somebody very close to you is. And left untreated, addiction leads to death or jail or institutions, essentially. And that's not just a saying, that's the reality. And so, you have to meet somebody where they're at in wherever they may be in their drug use, and do everything you can to try to help incentivize them to get the help that they need. Sometimes that's family support, making that happen. Sometimes it's through the counselors, the AA meetings, sponsors, everything you possibly can to get them help as soon as possible. Because especially now with fentanyl and other synthetic opiates mixed into everything that's on the streets, from Xanax, benzodiazepines, cocaine, all these drugs all have fentanyl in them, which means that every time somebody uses, it literally is a life and death day. And so the faster it is, right now, addiction is an absolute emergency, and people need to get help as soon as possible. So anything you can do to pull all your resources together and get that person to help is emergent.
I want to ask a follow-up, actually, because that made me think about something. But before I do, I want to acknowledge I at least am hearing an echo. So Tim, Jen, and Russ, I'm going to try muting some of our microphones between when we're not talking and see whether or not that helps. So don't be alarmed if I mute you. That's just seeing if I can solve this problem from my end. But so you mentioned the fentanyl, and what we've seen right now is that there's definitely a trend in the opioid epidemic, where first we had all these overdoses with prescriptions, and then it moved largely to heroin, and now we've moved on to fentanyl. And that really is the biggest driver in death right now. And so how do you work with someone who, say, for example, if they're using opioids and they're not ready to stop, if they're at a place where they haven't quite gotten to that point yet, how do you approach someone to try to keep them alive long enough to the point where they are ready to get help? Is there any way to expedite that process? Something families can do, or professionals, if professionals are listening?
Tim, you want to go?
Well, what I would suggest is getting an interventionist if you're in the position to do so. My wife and I, we do interventions nationwide, but a lot of families don't know what to do because either mom or dad or brother or sister or husband and wife has been the enabler. They've been co-signing the person struggling addiction, and it's getting a team of people in, and if specifically then if there's mental health issues, and having the right care team and interventionist team to come in to get the person to go. But then when that individual goes and gets help, they need to be working with the family too, because what so many families forget is this is a family disease. It is not just the addict or alcoholic. It affects everyone. So it's reaching out and getting an intervention put into place.
Mm-hmm. Russ, how about you? Any thoughts?
Absolutely. I think you do everything that you possibly can to get. We're in a situation like this. If a family comes to me and says, look, what do we do? Our son, our daughter, our mother, father, they don't want to get help, but we're worried they're going to die. The key is really to find where is the leverage? What leverage do we possibly have to make this person or help them get to where they need to be? Because you need to do anything you can to get them there. Because once they get there and their mind gets well, they'll start thinking differently. But right now you're dealing with someone whose mind is not well, and you have to do everything you can to help get them there. And I know Tim and Jenn do tremendous work with that. I know, Tim, in your book, you talk a lot about what you guys do and with your interventions. And interventions are a very big part of this. But even if let's say you don't have access to an interventionist, right? The key is, what's the leverage? Is this person is there an enabler that's helping this person maintain this addiction in some way, shape, or form? And if there is, that person might have the leverage to get them to put that carrot in front of them and say, if you go to treatment, then we'll do whatever you think it is that they want. Because even though that may not be what ultimately you do, it will get them to the help they need, and then they will think differently. But in the meanwhile, you have someone on a runaway train who can kill themselves.
And also, I so agree with what you're saying, Doc. I also think that if you're in a position where you can take things away from them, like what you're saying, like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna take your car away. I'm gonna take, this away. I'm gonna take your room. You're not gonna leave. I'm gonna take your phone away. Whatever that is, if it's someone that you're maintaining a 9.5 out of 10, I'll just say, they do have enablers in their lives, and I'm so glad Al-Anon didn't get a hold of my mom until I got sober. But then I got sober and they got a hold of her, and things changed. But the thing is that we need to really kind of, you got to try to think smarter than the active addict or alcoholic. And you got to just try, because you're trying to save their lives. I mean, at least being part of that, lifeline for them. It's scary. It's really scary. And I think this is like the worst case scenario. And Tim is going to be like, why'd you say this? But then sometimes you have to love them from a distance.
Absolutely. No, I want to chime in here, because if an addict or an alcoholic has a roof over their head, clothes on their back, food on their table, a hot shower, they can come and go as they please, there's no consequences, they have absolutely no reason to change. Well, I can't kick them out. They're going to die on the streets. No, most addicts die in their bedroom alone. Mm-hmm. They die alone. So yes, you give that person a choice. You have the opportunity to go to treatment and get the help you need. Or if you're going to live in my house, it's by these rules. And if you choose not to adhere to these rules, you can pack your stuff and go to the homeless shelter. That is a choice.
Mm-hmm. And to chime in a little bit myself, I think that connecting the dots, and this goes a little bit with what Dr. Surasky was saying, that you have to let people experience natural consequences of their actions. And that's when we talk about enabling. What that's about is when you bail them out from some sort of work consequence, or you pay their bail, or you help them get their car back on the road if it broke down because they spent all their money on their addiction. All those things enable the behavior to continue, when otherwise it would collapse under its own weight. And a big part of hitting that change point, we have in psychology, we call it, actually, this is embarrassing. I'm forgetting the technical name, but essentially that point where it is more uncomfortable to stay where you are than to face the discomfort of change, because change is always, has a lot of distress that goes along with it. And so the more you can help, from my perspective, the more you can help someone connect the dots between their behavior and the bad things in their life, and clearly say, oh, you've made this choice. That means you've chosen not to live at home, or you've chosen to lose this benefit. The quicker they'll get to the point where they realize that that's destroying them. Dr. Surasky, did you have something that you wanted to add? I saw you gesturing.
No, I just wanted to, again, emphatically reiterate what Tim and Jenn are saying here, which is that, the ones, unfortunately, the ones who don't make it are almost always the ones who are enabled, and they die in their warm homes with their loving families, who have basically, out of love, out of true love, enabled them, not intentionally, but we're not sort of taught how to handle addiction. It doesn't respond. You can't love somebody out of addiction, and unfortunately, that's the natural tendency for a family member to try to do, and it doesn't work, because we know that the way drugs hijack the brain, like Tim said, if they have a roof over their head and warm meals and they're comfortable, the drug will win out each and every day. And they'll say, you know what, I'll use today and I'll stop tomorrow. I'll use today and I'll stop tomorrow, until it's game over. 150 people are dead a day right now from opiate overdoses in this country. And that's many people. That's not just people who have overdosed, because many people get saved because of emergency Narcan and other things like that. That's 150 who died. And I'm sure that very few, if none of those 150 people who die every day said, I'm going to kill myself. All of them were probably saying, I'm going to get high one more time, and tomorrow I'm going to stop. And so every day is life and death.
Tim and Jenn, do you have any experience with that?
Actually, I love correcting doctors. It's actually about 180 people a day, which it's been that. But with what's happening now, it's over 200 people a day we're losing to opiates. Now, what people tend to forget is that doesn't count alcoholism. Yeah. That doesn't count benzodiazepines and other complications due to substance abuse or alcoholism. Alcohol kills more people on a daily basis than opiates do. But this opiate pandemic could really be put back if we started dropping the stigma and addressing it head on. But you look at the variables too. I had 2 phone calls yesterday from 2 individuals that were on methadone. And I'm going to ask 2 doctors here. They say methadone is a golden standard for opiate treatment. The one individual, I was called from a Chicago attorney, is on 100 milligrams of methadone and on benzodiazepine, Xanax. He got in a DUI, wrecked his car with his kid in the vehicle. He's sitting in Cook County Jail. He wants help, but he can't get into treatment because he has no insurance. Nowhere in the state of Illinois will they detox you off of methadone unless you're at about 25 milligrams or less. So this guy's just going to kick in a prison cell, and he's been on it 8 years. I had another lady yesterday who's on 95 milligrams, Southern Illinois, and it's affecting her liver. They have state insurance, and the husband says, my wife wants to get off. I said, she's going to have to work with the clinic and the doctor there to slowly wean off over the next 6 to 12 months, because here's another situation. Unless she's in the position to pay $10,000, $20,000 cash pay to go into an inpatient detox, these people can't get the help, but they're not told this out of the gate. And that's what bothers me. When I got on methadone in 2002 in Chicago, they told me it wasn't addictive, that I could quit anytime. And I got to 80 milligrams and tried to stop and got profusely sick. I went back to heroin. So, how can that be the gold standard? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, Russ, do you want to take it first?
Sure. Well, I like to say that we have something called the methadone industrial complex in this country, and that's because it's very much steeped for decades now as the solution. And while methadone does have a proven track record of reducing overdoses and helping to stop the spread of things like hepatitis and HIV, it does clearly help save lives. We have other solutions and better options now available that we didn't have before. And there's ways to transition people to those better options. But you have to have doctors or clinicians who are empathetic and care and work with that person to help them do that, because it's a process, and be able to communicate this message to them, to give them hope that they can do it. And there's nothing that should stop them. Methadone clinics, the reason I kind of say that, the methadone industrial complex, is because many patients I hear day in, day out who tell me, I speak with my doctor at the methadone clinic and I tell them I want help coming down, and I really get sort of given the, okay, maybe next time, and then these tapers that go on indefinitely, and patients get fed up, and that has negative consequences, because then what happens is they try to do it on their own, and then that becomes a devastating cascade of withdrawal and relapse with, God forbid, other opiates that can wind up killing them. So in my outpatient program, we transfer people over from methadone all the time to help them. But I know that, unfortunately, that's not what may typically be happening around the country.
Yeah, I guess to add on for a second there. So I've actually had a conversation with someone who owns a medication-assisted therapy program where they did methadone and others, who's literally said, we've got them over a barrel. They'll do whatever we ask them to do, in terms of do this, don't do that. So they know. And the reason why I bring that up is that although there's tremendous good that comes from medication-assisted therapy, obviously methadone's one, buprenorphine, you most often hear Suboxone's another, Vivitrol, naltrexone is a third that's very clearly shown in the literature to do a good job at keeping people alive. The financial incentives are all off, where we actually, the clinics are essentially rewarded financially for keeping people in there, for not tapering them off, to having them on higher doses. And that's a huge problem. When the financial incentives are off, it can absolutely lead you astray. Tim and Jenn, I see you guys gesturing. Do you want to add something?
So you just hit the nail on the head. I had a personal friend of mine who's now 32, opiate addict. He had been to treatment 4 or 5 times, got 90 days sober, came back to Illinois, to my former hometown where you live, Doc, and went to a place for outpatient, which had MAT. 90 days into his outpatient, now he was in Florida 90 days, so now he's 6 months clean and sober, 100%. The person at the program comes up and says, well, you either need to get on Suboxone or methadone to stay in our program. And he said, what are you talking about? I just want to keep doing outpatient. Well, for you to be a client here, you need to be on one or the other. You're showing signs that you're going to relapse. And that was total BS. They wanted to get him on either Suboxone or methadone so they could keep him billing in their insurance program as an outpatient client for the next year. That was their motive there. And unfortunately, a lot of this goes on. Both docs, I wish we had more doctors like both of you working with patients nationwide that had the care and compassion and understanding to meet people where they're at, but get them out of this fog of, there is a better, easier, softer way. And let's try Vivitrol, and let's get you working on some of the trauma and get you seeing Dr. Weiner as a therapist, and go work with Tim and Jenn on recovery. And you got a ticket for success, but we need more of this triangle here coming together to help each individual succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Surasky, because you are obviously very involved in this on a professional level. If you or someone or a family member is wanting to trying to get the good part of medication-assisted therapy without some of the pitfalls that we've been talking about, how do you select a program? Because I know, being an industry insider, the questions to ask, the people, I know where I would want to send people. But from the consumer perspective, if you've got a problem, it's really hard to tell. So what would you recommend in terms of how you evaluate physicians or clinics? How do people figure this out?
Yeah, unfortunately, as I'm sure Tim can speak to this further, and Jenn, it is the Wild West out there right now when people get in treatment. And I've heard Tim and Jenn speak about this at length, and I hope they do chime in. But because I know that they work on a project of helping to make sure that people get placed in facilities and treatment centers that are not incentivized by kickbacks. And that is why it's the Wild West. We have a lot of people who are working for rehabs, and essentially what they're doing is they're just getting kickbacks by bringing people to the Florida model or to California or places that they kind of lure people in by saying, look, it's like a vacation, that type of a thing. And then they have the Florida shuffle where they go from one rehab to the next and the next. And ultimately, many of them aren't getting any better. They're getting sicker because they're not getting individualized good care to help them. So generally speaking, I work with very few rehabs. Only the ones that I know I trust. I know who the clinicians are, the therapists are. I see the results. I see that they offer all forms of MAT. They don't pressure people to be on one or another. They customize it to each person. If someone were to get Vivitrol, for example, they make sure that they connect you with someone on the outside before you leave to get that second shot. right? So you're not just hanging around looking for someone, that you're connected to meetings, 12-step meetings, or a counselor. But it's wraparound care that is really what works. It's not sort of this piecemeal, oh yeah, maybe we'll give you a shot on the way out and then good luck to you, you know, and it really is the Wild West out there. So Jen, you could take it from here, but this is a problem. This field needs a lot more regulation.
Oh, yeah. You got me going here. So, you know, when I stumbled into this industry a little over 6 years ago, I learned a lot of things very quickly. And between my wife and I, we have stepped foot in over 2,000 treatment centers nationwide. People need to understand there's 35,000 treatment centers in the United States of America, from for-profit to nonprofit to faith-based, Christian-based. There's probably 20 to 25 good ones. And you hit the nail on the head. Oh, we're dual diagnosis. I'll tell you, my son that died, Nick had been to treatment 6 times by 20 years old. He went to one of the same treatment centers 5 times. I always had great insurance and out-of-network insurance policy, but I didn't know what I didn't know. In his 3 to 4 week stay at this specific program, he would see a psychiatrist 1 time. He saw a therapist 2 times. Otherwise, he sat in groups the entire time. You need to get people to programs to where they're getting the substance abuse and alcoholism help, the mental health help, and the underlying trauma. Today, Jennifer and I do not work for a treatment center. You know, we do interventions, we speak, we do consulting. But the nice thing is, a 32-year-old female contacts Jen and says, you know, I have sexual trauma, I have eating disorder, I'm an alcoholic. We know 3 or 4 programs that we can refer her to because we've met the clinical team. We know the addictionologist or the medical director. That's what you need to focus on. But also the variable
Not one size fits all.
You know, one size doesn't fit all. But here's also the problem. A lot of families can't cash pay $25,000 to $100,000 a month for treatment. With an out-of-network insurance policy, yes, you have a lot more opportunities. With an HMO insurance policy, the average stay in treatment now is 18 to 21 days. That's it. Same with state insurance. So you're telling me a 52-year-old male alcoholic heroin addict, 3 weeks of treatment and I'm going to be fixed? We need a full continuum of care from detox to residential to PHP to IOP to long-term structured sober living, still connected with my therapist, my doctor, whether I'm on the MAT track or whatever, and truly building a foundation. The whole industry needs to be revamped because what we have in place is setting people up to fail. Yeah. That's why we have a 10% success rate of people getting clean and sober. And yes, the fraud and the scams, it's sickening and it's disheartening. What do you want to chime in?
No, I mean, I agree with you on that. I just for an example for anyone who's listening out there, because I was a relapser, a constant relapser, I could not get sober to save my life or stay sober. And I didn't know how to stay stopped. For the first 5 years of my recovery, I did aftercare. Like, I'm so grateful for my aftercare. Like, I did the continuum care, like you know, plus the program, plus the people in the 12-step rooms, plus, you know, sober companions, plus all this stuff. Like, I did therapy and psychiatry.
How long did you do inpatient treatment? How long were you in
9.5 months.
How much out of pocket did you spend?
$186,000.
Of your own money?
Yeah, after really great insurance.
After insurance.
And I paid them at sometimes $5 a month. I mean, like, literally, but I mean, I would do my job. When I was unemployable, but up until 2.5 years, then I did Sober House with Dr. Drew. And it's because I took over H&I, took over all these things. I was doing being of service. That's all I did. And then I did these shows, but my group of people, core people with my sponsor and you know, my sobriety family, they would let me go into Hollywood and then they pull me back out, like 15 minutes into a party. And then they take me out if I had to do that. But I would do my jobs and I go right back into the 12-step rooms because I really needed to learn one thing. And that was everything, you know, and I didn't know that then. So I needed to follow directions and trust the process, and not just with the 12 steps, but with my doctors. I needed to be adamant on my medications. I needed to follow thoroughly my sessions. I needed to do all the internal work. If you don't deal with the trauma, you will never get better. And if you keep those enablers around you, if the enablers, the loved ones, do not get better with the alcoholic or addict, you are setting them up to fail.
Absolutely. And I think one of the This links back to something that we were talking about earlier in the broadcast, was that you mentioned that, so first of all, that it takes time, but then also that when you've got, Tim, these folks who are on public aid and they don't know where to go. I mean, the idea of 186, like if that's the number, $186,000 that it might take for someone to get sober, not everyone can afford that, and certainly not if you're on public aid. And so I think for me, the big question, and I'm so hopeful that eventually we'll see some movement on this, is how do we start to change even the financial calculus of this to be more focused on treatment and prevention than on morgues, essentially, and triage.
Sorry. I do want to say this. One of the things that I have said to my family member, my mom, my brother, my husband, if God forbid I were to ever relapse, take me to the Salvation Army to get better, or take me to this place that I know, or if they find another place like this, Casa de las Amigas, I don't even know if they're open anymore, but it's like, it's all women, Salvation Army, it's all strict. Like, you follow those rules and you have no gas for failure. Like, you mess up, they kick you out. Like, that's the kind of treatment, because it doesn't matter. It's me wanting, it's the individual. It doesn't matter where you go, poshy or not poshy. Like, so if I'm telling you that I'm telling them to take me to the Salvation Army to get a bed, I mean, it's the same. It's structure. It's structure. It's structure.
And is the right treatment, but also even just being able to get in the first place.
Right.
I think the financial. We're coming back to the financial a lot, because that's where I think addiction ends up in a lot of cases. But even if you think about the cost to society, right, and how we're putting all this money towards trying to make this better. Tim, you mentioned we're still losing almost 90,000 lives, rather.
Yeah.
Per year to alcohol, and that's been going on for decades. I think we would be far, far better off financially if we invested in restoring people to health and treating them, because you absolutely can be. I want to make sure that we give Dr. Surasky a chance to talk as well, because I'm having to juggle these mutes. Russ, do you have a thought on this?
I think only, again, to reiterate what you guys were saying, is that, first of all, some of this is state specific. Again, it's a little bit of the Wild West, right? In New York State, we have something called OASIS, and that's the certifying body that regulates outpatient treatment programs. So if you go to an outpatient treatment program in New York, of which there's many, okay, you know that you're going to a facility that's following certain guidelines, evidence-based medicine. You're going to do an intake. You're going to see a doctor who specializes in addiction. You're going to have different treatment programs and groups and tracks and urine testing. So New York certifies certain centers and those centers accept Medicaid, managed Medicaid, commercial plans. You don't need out-of-network benefits. But for example, in New York, if you don't know what to do with your family member or yourself, you kind of just go to an OASIS center. They do an intake, they evaluate your picture, and they help put you, if you need to go to inpatient, they'll refer you to an inpatient that takes your insurance, Medicaid or otherwise. If you need outpatient, then you'll stay in the outpatient program, but you'll still see the doctor, you'll get offered MAT. This is what we do at Bridge Back to Life, and other OASIS centers do the same. I think there's probably similar certifying bodies to rehabs in other states. I'm just not as familiar with them. And then just one other quick point is, there's also the supply side of this, right? We also have drugs that are flooding into our country that at record paces, especially fentanyl. None of the fentanyl comes from the United States. It comes from other countries. And so part of this is also trying to stop, and this brings into some legalities and politics, but we have to try to stop the fentanyl and other drugs from pouring into our country, because, alcohol is a different situation, but alcohol, yes. Alcohol, 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 people right now meet the criteria for an alcohol use disorder. I agree with you. It's a tremendous problem, majorly underdiagnosed. But the difference with opiate addiction and fentanyl is, you have 16 and 17-year-old kids who are trying something for the first time and they die because it's that lethal. So it's no longer where you get the sort of go to rehab after rehab and get the pieces of the puzzle and figure it out for yourself and come out the other end, in a better place. A lot of people are dying before they are even addicted because of how lethal these drugs are. And so part of it is stopping this. It's better treatment here, but we also have to do something to stop the shipments of fentanyl into our country.
Yeah, Tim, did you have a thought?
Yes, and I agree. And unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to stop it. Drugs are never going to go away, whether it's coming from Mexico, Colombia, Afghanistan. Drugs are here to stay. I think we need to flip it, and we need to focus more, which my wife and I do, on the prevention. We need to start educating our youth and their families from 6th grade on. You know, we speak to middle school, we speak to high schoolers, and it's not a talk about, oh, I did this. It's educating these kids on what's really going on today. What are the realities? What are the consequences? What do you want to say?
It just hit me. I'm sorry. Prior to COVID happening, we were going to schools and speaking to 2,500 kids. And like, we literally would go into these towns and we'd sit down with the principal and the staff and say, you know, what's going on here? You know, what's the majority top 3? They're like, nothing in our, nothing here.
Little weed.
That's it. We need family traumas with the kid. Nothing. Then we'd start talking, right? And then Tim does his whole thing, raising the hands. And 90% of the kids would raise their hand with whether they either tried drugs, drinking, family trauma, overdoses, suicides. And you're like thinking like ignorance is bliss here. Like, wake up, people. Like, it's happening in your town and in your city and on your block.
So, and one thing I will ask every high school in the country, there has been two, one in Long Island, New York, and one in Shelbyville, Indiana, were the only 2 high schools in the United States of America that we've spoke at that had a full-time substance abuse counselor and a full-time mental health counselor on staff as a full-time salaried employee. These schools are completely ill-equipped to deal with the pandemic of opiates, of trauma, of mental health, addiction, panic, all these kids have no one to turn to. You know what they turn to? A cell phone. They turn to the internet. They turn to Instagram, to TikTok. They have no one to talk to, and they have no one to educate them. That's where our huge problem is. Everyone's head is in the sand. These kids do not know about the Good Samaritan law, to where, you know, if we're using together and somebody overdoses from alcohol or drugs, you can call 911. The police will come, hopefully save the person, take the drugs, and nobody gets arrested. We are not educating our youth about this. Who is to blame? The school superintendents, the school board, the PTA. They don't know about these laws. So everything is so backwards. That's why everything needs to be redeveloped, and we need to start from the beginning, but it all starts with the prevention and awareness. And yes, we need to stop the flow of drugs, but is it ever going to happen? It hasn't happened.
You're saying start with the demand rather than the supply.
Well, you know, I think this is something else that I feel really scared, fearful. No, let me just say this differently. I'm really concerned for is that when the lockdowns, you know, and everyone are over and everyone starts going back to school and all this stuff, all the trauma that's going to come back, you know, all these kids with so much trauma that's going on in their homes, or drug use, you know, out of control, alcoholism, out of skyrocketing, more mental health, more, you know, more crises going on than ever before, because it's already happening now. Can you imagine what it's going to be like then? So we have to try to help prevent this, you know?
How can we, when our mental health providers and our doctors and everything are in crisis now dealing with COVID, you know?
Right.
Pandora's box is getting opened again.
It's open.
Because this pandemic with COVID has set us back at least 10 years with the opiate pandemic and the mental health crisis, in my view.
So I think this is a good segue actually to our last topic that I want to make sure we have time to talk about today. We've got about 10 minutes left, and that has to do with legal marijuana and its impact on society. And the reason why I say this links a lot of what we're talking about together is that we're seeing what you're speaking of in terms of kids dealing with trauma and mental health. One of the reasons why we're seeing this overdose spike during COVID, why we're seeing so many people buy alcohol, buy pot, is because it's a coping mechanism. People are trying to figure out some way to deal with these stressors, to deal with their depression, and they're going for something that feels like a solution in the short term. And kids do the same thing. And one of the disturbing trends that we've seen over the past decade or so is that the marijuana use rate of kids has either been steady or going up. Certainly in the last couple of years, we've seen more up than steady, while other things have all been pretty much been going down consistently, even if it's still very present. And so if folks viewing know anything about me, know that I've been a very firm opponent to commercializing marijuana. We call it legalization a lot, but that's actually something different. You can take away felonies. You can turn something into just like a petty offense, like a traffic ticket, without creating a commercial market for sale, which is what we've done in states that have legalized marijuana, creating these for-profit enterprises to sell an addictive drug. We just saw 4 more states authorize this sort of market as of last year. And I saw a news article about a week ago, a new journal article rather, that had been published that found that in a survey even 2 years ago, this was data from 2017, the kids who were regularly using marijuana, 50% of them said that they were driving high. That they'd driven high recently, that they'd been driving high while they were smoking. And so I just wanted to throw the question out to you guys as physicians and folks with lived experience. What do you feel this trend towards marijuana, Jen, what you said, like it's just weed. You hear that a lot. How do you think that's impacting society, and then also particularly young people?
Let Doc go first.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a couple of things to unpack here with marijuana. The first is that, how it's not what we've come to understand in this field of medicine is that it's not just about the drug. It's about your brain also, your individual brain, and how that particular drug affects the chemical processes in your brain, which is why, the reason why someone can have half a glass of wine and put it down and forget that it was even there and walk away, and somebody else has to really try very hard to try to stay sober. They could have 10 years sober and have one drink and everything goes off the rails. And that's not because that person has bad morals. That was the old way of thinking. We know that that drug just has a different cascade of neurological events in that person's brain that traps them that it doesn't do to somebody else. And it's the same thing with marijuana. It's very easy to say, to take a black and white stance and say it's all evil, it's all wonderful. But in reality, it's different for each person. I have seen people, let's say their drug of choice is opiates, for example. I have seen people who get sober with the exception of smoking marijuana, and they actually stay sober and they go to meetings and they live their life and they're productive, and there's no evidence that marijuana is harming them. And then there are other cases, other people who the minute marijuana comes into play, right, then all of a sudden here come the benzos and then back to opiates again. So it's a trap door for some, and for others it's not, and that's based on a person's brain. So it's an individualized thing, and so when you just blankly legalize it, I'm a strong opponent, just like you are, because I think we're going to we have enough people driving under the influence of other drugs and alcohol, let alone now adding marijuana. So I agree with you. This sort of blanket commercialization of it is a disaster. And one other point I just want to say is that, because you mentioned the age range, we know the brain is still developing, specifically this prefrontal cortical area of the brain, which is so important for decision making and motivation. And it's developing during those teenage years, and it continues to develop until you're 22, 23 years old. So when you're smoking marijuana during that age, during those years, it is having negative consequences on the development. We know that. Now, so somebody who's smoking marijuana, at 16 years old, what's happening to them is very different than someone who's, 40 and at a concert and has a joint. It's a different situation. So it's more complex than simply marijuana is evil or it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I want to just chip in before I turn over to Tim and Jen, because I really want to hear your perspective on this as well. It's something where I feel like the normalization and the lowering of perceived risk, that the kids, for example, they don't realize that today's weed is literally 7 times as strong as it was at Woodstock, and that the higher percentage of THC leads to greater addiction and more problems. Even the facts, sometimes people will say, like, hey, well, why are you against pot? We do this for alcohol. Why don't we do this for weed? And it's like, well, 2 wrongs don't make a right. I mean, we just talked about how we're losing 90,000 people a year to alcohol, right? That doesn't mean we should let something else out of the bag and propagate that. So, I mean, it's a very complex issue. But Tim and Jen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Listening to Dr. Surasky speak, I was so conflicted, because I love everything you say and I'm so with you, behind you. And you also, Dr. Weiner, I'm so confused, because I'm one of those people that I've cross addicted, right? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm not an addict anymore, or maybe I'm not an alcoholic, because I just, I stopped. I've always played with all that. My mind has played those games and I've relapsed every time. So like, I'm not that girl that can honestly like go and smoke weed and be okay with that. And just be the weed smoker. But it just scares me because it's like, how many people are doing that just to numb or to self-medicate because there's really underlying issues going on out there? I don't know the percentage. I really personally don't. I was taught that you're either sober or you're not. And it's not bad to say that you're no longer, that you're not sober, or like, you don't have to like declare it to the world that, you know, you're in relapse mode because you're just smoking weed. But I don't know if that's really, I'm so torn with it because God forbid I had cancer right now and I was going through painful, you know, chemo and all that. I'd probably, and they told me to smoke weed, I'd probably do that because I'm not to say that I wouldn't do that. So I'm really conflicted with this.
That's why we can be married and disagree.
We had this conversation last night.
I'm with Dr. Russell. I call him Dr.
I know
Russell.
we call him Dr.
I would
Russell.
much rather have someone smoking weed than jamming a needle in their arm.
Yeah.
And if someone can go from opiates to smoking weed and working in a PHP or IOP level and ultimately hopefully get to an abstinence-based level one day, that's phenomenal. But if they're smoking weed in a productive member of society, good for them. But we are not talking about the adolescent kids here.
Yeah.
When we speak in high schools, we've spoke to over 1 million students nationwide. 90% of them have tried weed. 90%. This weed is, as you said, Dr. Weiner, this is 7 to 10 times stronger than the weed I grew up smoking. So take this scenario. Jennifer and I are both 16 years old. We're at a high school party. We smoke some of this high-grade weed or smoke a dab or two, which could be 50, 60, 70% THC. I have 1 drink, 2 drinks. My inhibitions are dropped, and I come up and say, here, try this pill, snort this line. If it's an opiate, it's a benzodiazepine, it's cocaine, Pandora's box is opened. These kids would have never tried that if they weren't stoned in the first place. So what I would ask them is, what is going on so wrong in your life at 14, 15, 16 years old that you have to smoke weed in the first place? Because there is some form of trauma, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, or sexual that is going on that they are numbing themselves, bottom line.
Yeah.
So Russ, I saw you wanted to add something. Could you add in, and then we're all going to take a second and wrap up?
Sure. I'll try to make it quick. Just to Jen and Tim's point, I'd much rather an individual who's struggling with addiction get completely sober. I mean, that is the ideal situation. No mood-altering drugs at all. But what I have seen and what the clinical evidence has shown is that there are people who can use medical marijuana and still lead productive lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost is as inhibits their cravings for other drugs in some people. In other people, like you said, it's Pandora's box. And if the universe teaches that to you through the school of hard knocks, so like Jen, you said, if I touch one thing, everything else is coming out. And so that happens to some people. It's a brain thing. And in other people, it doesn't. It's not my opinion. It's just what I see clinically. So I think, listen, and for exactly what you said, Tim, I've seen cases where people are completely sober. I mean, completely sober for a long time, going to meetings, getting Vivitrol, and then they put themselves in harm's way. They go to a bar and they have a drink and they say, well, what's a drink going to do? And then someone offers them an Oxy because their inhibition's lowered. Now they take the Oxy and it's game over. And so I agree with you. I'd much rather complete sobriety. I'm just simply acknowledging the fact that I have seen some programs where they say, if you smoke weed, you're out of the program. Meanwhile, the person has now been heroin free for 8 months.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
For marijuana. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's a successful a way to measure as black and white smoking marijuana, then you're completely out of the loop. And I don't think that you got to look at each person, put your doctor, your clinician hat on and look at each person and say, what am I seeing in this person?
It is a really good point. And actually, so this idea, this came up quite a lot at the hospital I was at, is the question of, all right, if someone's doing well, except for the marijuana, how do we handle that? It really is an intersection of a lot of really challenging issues, because as I think, Jen, you mentioned, if someone is using the marijuana to numb out, that's very different than if they're using it to, say, suppress nausea, as you mentioned, and if someone, say, has cancer, or if they're using it medically. Honestly, and this is a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down, but medical marijuana does not need to be nearly as strong as it is to have an impact. You could be taking 2.5 milligrams of THC, and have some positive benefit if it's a condition that's been shown to respond to that. Whereas if you smoke a joint of, again, today's weed, it's closer probably to 40 milligrams. And those concentrates, which honestly you can get right now up to 90% pure, are just blowing that all off the charts. So I think it's really, the purpose behind it matters a lot. The one other thing I want to make sure that I mention while we're on this topic and before we wrap up is that from just a pure, like sociological, from a research perspective, we actually don't have any solid evidence that using marijuana to, say, come down off of opioids works as a strategy. It's not to say that for some people that it can't. But that when we talk about the recommendations we make as psychologists or as physicians, and if someone asks me like, hey, is this a good idea? Any one specific person, we can't necessarily make those judgments for them, but we always have to look at the data when we think about what we're recommending. So that being said, I want to take a second so that everyone can close. We've covered a lot of ground today in terms of topics. I know I've learned a lot from you, and thanks again for coming on. But Tim and Jenn, I've got you guys unmuted right now. Can you tell folks who are watching, is there anything you'd like to end with? And then how could people get in touch with you if they'd like to reach out?
No, it's this has been amazing. We'd like to thank you because it's people like you two that we learn from. I get my knowledge and wisdom and guidance from doctors, from clinicians. That's who I learn from. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I surround myself with people that are smarter than me and better looking than me. So I commend all three of you. You can reach Jennifer and I at our website, www.dope2hope.com, or you can call us at 844-611-HOPE, 844-611-4673. What do you have to say?
Dr. I'm sorry, Jenn, go ahead.
Thank you. Say thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. I know the time is short. So thank you very much. I'm really honored to be part of this group, having this open conversation with you. And I think this is really what this is all about in people in homes. And if you're out there and you're struggling, I'll just say this really quick. If you're struggling, I get it. I really do. And I want to say this because this is what they said to me. I encourage you to try to get to know the person you're trying to kill before you kill him or her, because you might realize that you matter and that you are so loved and that your story is not done. And it's up to you how you want to tell your story. And I want to let you know that I can honestly sit here and tell you that I love you and I expect nothing in return.
Thanks, Jenn. And Dr. Surasky, any last thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone, on the show today. And I deeply appreciate you inviting me on and getting to spend this time. And I think every time we do this, even if one person listens, one person makes a difference, it could be all the difference in the world, right? So we can't do enough of these types of things. I would also just want to say that whoever's listening, there's tremendous hope. It doesn't matter how dark things may seem or how much you're using or how many rehabs you've been to. I see on a regular basis people who have been to 9 inpatients, 10 outpatients, 5 overdoses in Narcan. And I see people in those situations where everyone says, just give up. They're not going to get better, and they get better. Sometimes the pieces come together, but you're going to greatly increase their chances of success if you get them to a good facility. And certainly I could speak to facilities local to the tri-state area, but I think Tim, if Tim could speak for one more moment, I know that you guys work, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, with an organization that helps connect people to reliable places that we know have good clinicians and good teams. Because if you can get somebody there, it can save their life no matter how bad that you think it is. So there's tremendous hope. There's new treatments available that people don't even know about. Hell, half the doctors don't even know about it, let alone the public. And so we got to keep doing these things and get the information out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we do, and we run a nonprofit too. So like I said, that phone number I gave out, 844-611-4673, it rings to my personal cell phone. So we answer every call, every Facebook message, Instagram, Jennifer Gimenez on all social media, Tim Ryan, A Man in Recovery. Search us, you'll find us. It's out there. Google's your friend.
You're incredibly generous with your time, not only for coming on this show, but in terms of helping everyone who reaches out. And Tim in particular, I think I've known you the longest of everyone on this call. That is what you are known for, is absolutely being available. absolutely being there, no matter who it is, no matter what their situation. If they want to get help, you're there for them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming on the call, and viewers for tuning in. Tim, Jen, and Russ, everyone here has a social media presence and is very active in terms of pushing out great new information, perspectives. Make sure to follow, subscribe, keep track of everybody. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can reach me by email at aaron@weinerphd.com. Please feel free to reach out. I'm very accessible as well. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in, and we will talk to you again soon.